I know there's a lot of Mavs fans who are watching the Celtics and seeing Robert Williams, seeing that effect that you can get from a big and wondering how you can get a big on this Dallas Mavericks team. And, I mean, there's a lot of names that have been thrown out. What do you think is the most viable, the most reasonable expectation for a big that could be added to this roster in this offseason?
Yeah, and I was the first to throw the Mavericks into the mix on Rudy Gobert mid-season, kind of projecting that the Jazz could be in blow-it-up mode. I can tell you, at the time, the Mavericks brain trust was all in on that. That's no longer the case. You know, they've come to the kind of the realization of, hey, we don't necessarily want to be paying $40 million per year to a player who's not going to be a focal point offensively. And, you know, simple fact is Brunson's going to be making $6 or $7 million a year more than they anticipated. When you start talking about luxury tax, that gets really tough. So what the Mavericks are trying to do is they're trying to find, say, 50% of Gobert's impact at 25 or 30% of the price, if that makes sense. And, of course, with Gobert, it's not just what you would have to pay him, but what you would have to give up to get him. Multiple picks, probably one or both of Bullock and Finney-Smith. You know, it's too much. Now, you know, Clint Capela, for example, is a guy who could be on the move this summer. I think the Hawks are certainly willing to discuss him. I do think, you know, he's a guy who's making about half the money as Gobert. I think he's a guy who isn't as impactful, but does impact the game in a lot of similar ways. And, you know, he got him and Trae Young hooked up on the most lobs in the league this season. If you catch him from Trae Young, I promise you can catch him from Luka Doncic. You know, JaVale McGee is a name that I know interests the Mavericks. And you know, whether he starts or not, you know, he'd be more of that like 18 to 20 minute per game guy. But the other part of this is, obviously, the Mavs had a ton of success playing Maxi Kleber at center, going 5 out with, you know, with all 3-point threats on the floor. They still want to play that way a lot, particularly in the playoffs. They just want to be able to have a guy who can really be impactful as a finisher, as a rim protector, as a rebounder when they play the more traditional style. And, you know, Dwight Powell has been a really good soldier for the organization. He's not a starting center on a contender, and you know, they understand that.
When you look at this roster and how they've been put together, obviously, you know, rim protection, rebounding needed, but then a lot of the conversation around is a second co-star needed for this team. Is this a team, and you've written something about this as well, is this a team when you look at it, do they necessarily need that co-star, or is it something that they can continue to build around Doncic with high-level role players to be able to continue to win in the future?
Well, and here's the thing about this is I don't see a clear path to getting a co-star immediately, right? So, like, we can talk about it all you want. I don't see that. To me, if you're going to be able to get a co-star in here, you better have high-quality players on decent contracts, because the route to a co-star is going to be via trade. At some point, the hope is, hey, somebody would be a really good fit with Luka is going to tell their team, hey, get me out here. I want to be traded to Dallas. The Mavericks need to be armed with picks, and they need to be armed with salary that matches and has value. And so my point is, just because they go, and I guess the short answer is I think it's going to be more of Luka and high-caliber role players. I think that's what we're going to see going into next season. But also understand that route can eventually be the path to a co-star. But if you, for example, let's say you don't pay Jalen Brunson leaves, you've got nothing to show for it, well, all you've done there is lost not only production, but a potential asset in a trade.
Tim, you've done incredible work, not just covering the Mavs, but obviously covering a few other teams. And obviously, since the Rockets suck, you've been getting into the Grizzlies and the Utah Jazz. And Utah's been really fascinating to me, what's happening with that team, because they're at the precipice of a change. What insight do you have into like their thought process as Quinn Snyder's not there, and it feels like, maybe we're not right, but it feels like they're going to have to make a decision on which of those big two players they want to further build around in the future?
Well, and they've made the decision that if it's one or the other, it's going to be Donovan Mitchell, who's younger, who's more marketable. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I think he's more impactful, but everything has kind of revolved around Donovan for the last couple of years in terms of franchise decision making on big things, small things. I mean, I'm talking about like who's running the training staff to, details in the practice facility, so on and so forth. They want to continue building around him. The question is, how much longer before Donovan is one of these stars who goes to the organizations and say, boy, it's been a great run, no hard feelings, but get me the hell out of here. And by the way, I want to go to either this team or that team. He's got 3 guaranteed years left on his contract, so in terms of influencing where he goes at this point, I think it'll be very difficult. I don't think he puts that much pressure on them this summer, but I think he's gone within a year, or at least by the end of next off season. That's my educated guess there. And they're going to try to trade Gobert. They're going to try to trade him this summer, but what they're not doing is trying to trade Rudy for, to kickstart a rebuild, which frankly, if I was running that organization, that's what I would be doing. I'd be trading them both, going into the tank for a couple of years and trying to collect assets. I'd be looking at that, kind of the OKC model right now. They're not doing that. They're trying to trade Gobert and get pieces that they think will fit with Donovan Mitchell and allow them to remain competitive.
Tim, before we let you go here, I want to ask you this when it comes to Jalen Brunson and what this does for this team now going into next year, because it appears this team is obviously motivated to sign him and bring him back, going into the future. What does that do for this team, not only as it's currently constructed, but what they want to do and see for their future with him as a part of this roster and how that looks for Luka Doncic and the rest of this team?
Well, I think Brunson whether you want to discuss, is he a co-star, whatever. He is a quality player who has proven that he can get buckets in the playoffs and knows very well how to adapt his game to fit with Luka Doncic. So, you can argue, well, you need to be better with your number 2 guy. Okay, that's fine and dandy. But again, to me, Brunson, he's proven you can win in the playoffs with him. He knows how to play off of Luka. He knows, hey, when Luka's sitting, I'm going to run the show for a little bit. His ego's not getting in the way. Now, he earned a lot more money than you wanted to pay him. But again, I get back to, if you have Jalen Brunson, and if he's making 22, 24 a year, he's still a tradable asset. If you don't have him, you don't get cap space. You just don't have to pay luxury tax. And I always say the best way not to pay luxury tax is don't put a competitive roster around Luka Doncic and let him be the one forcing his way out. You'll shed a supermax contract if you go that route, and obviously the Mavericks have no intention to do that. I expect Jalen Brunson back next year, and I'm not telling you if he signs a 4-year deal, a 5-year deal, I can't guarantee you he'll be here the whole time, but I do have a lot of confidence in saying that signing Jalen Brunson to that contract will benefit the Mavericks one way or the other.
Real quick follow-up to that. With that, how has his perception around the league changed and how people view him as a player, not just as a player, but what his value is based on what he did this past year?
Yeah, and so his value, and I talked to people about him and Dorian Finney-Smith pretty much all season long because I knew those were the 2 key Mavericks going into free agency and, so on and so forth. For most of the season, people kind of looked at Brunson right around the number of that extension, which would have been 4 years, $55.5 million, the same one that Finney-Smith got. I should say for about the first half of the season. Late in the season, he'd outplayed that. By the time they put it on the table at the trade deadline, he knew he'd outplayed that. And at that point, it was more like, he's about an 18, maybe $20 million a year player. After what he did in the playoffs, he will get more than that. He's going to get somewhere between $20 and $25 million. And again, with Brunson, you can talk about him as a scorer. I think you also have to, and this is a really important piece in terms of the Mavericks, you have to evaluate the intangibles as well. This guy is a great locker room fit. He's a great teammate. His ego doesn't get in the way, which I think you need playing off of Luka Doncic, especially as a guy who is able to create with the ball in his hands. And he is a proven winner. You don't win 2 national championships in Villanova and not have some championship caliber characteristics.